Okay, so thank you again for the invitation to come here. It's a great pleasure to be here in this extremely interesting gathering. I'll take it actually quite from where Ronit stopped. It's very much connecting our two presentations. But I must say that during, from the beginning of this day, I've been thinking about what I'm going to say, and many of the things that were presented before really influenced that, and made me think about these different things that I'm going to talk about. So I'll try to stay with one line of thought, but if all kinds of things that were brought up during the day will come up, so I'll interrupt my line of thought, and I hope you'll walk with me on that. So. One thing that I want to say about that is in my presentation I would like to present different factors, similarly to what Ronit was speaking about, that influenced peacemaking in Northern Ireland. I'll use the term peacemaking. Let's be friends about that. We can use conflict transformation, everything goes. But I'll use peacemaking. So I'll try to explain the process of peacemaking in Northern Ireland during the 1990s using three factors, which I find to be important. But I must say that the talks during this morning made me think that, in a more of a humble way, that definitely, even though these three factors are important and I think have high contribution to understanding this process, as we saw today, coming from economical point of view or even mathematical or the perspective that Peter was speaking about are not necessarily of lower importance. Anyway, let's start with something though. So when we speak about theories that talk about the timing of when it is ripe, readiness by Zartman, Prout, and the other scholars who speak about timing, so I think a major question is who? Who is ready? Who is ripe? And in many cases, the answer would be the leader. And since many of these scholars come from international relations, so the level of analysis is focused on the decision maker. What I would like to add to that is that it's not only the leadership, and we cannot speak only about the leader who can change, transform, make this kind of steps towards peace. So who is influencing as well? I'd like to take a quote from Gerry Adams, who said in 1996, peace in Ireland requires much more of political leaders. The people expect their representatives to measure up to the challenges of this time, not least because the people realize that they will be the losers if the politicians fail. And I think he really encapsulates the three major factors that I would like to address. Leadership, of course, but society members as well, and the context that Ronit also mentioned in her presentation. So if we think about peacemaking or transformation of conflicts, we can think about, and as Marcus was mentioning, as a process of change. And I'd like to suggest that we can think about this process of change in almost spatial point of view, meaning about a space where an opportunity for peace can come up or this opportunity will shut down. And I'd like to suggest that there are three main factors that can influence this space of opportunity for change. Leadership and how prone it will be to promote peace from various reasons. How much the context, events in reality, third-party interventions, the actions of the other side, how are these things influencing this opportunity, and how much society members and society as a whole is ready to accept these ideas and step forward with these steps. So the case study that I will look at is Northern Ireland as well, and we're speaking about intractable conflict, so definitely these connections are not being done only in the world of academia, but also on the ground, as I guess many of you who study these conflicts know very well the connection between different conflicts. I'll go over that, of course. I'll skip. And the two leaders that I will focus on when I'll speak about leadership, will be Gerry Adams, who, as Ronit mentioned, started being the president of the Sinn Féin, the most important political wing of the Republican movement since 1980s and until today, by the way, and David Trimble, who headed the then largest Unionist party, the Ulster Unionist Party, UUP. So let's look at two main periods during the 1990s, and let's try to compare these two different periods, looking from the perspective of context, society, and leadership. So the two periods would be the pre-negotiation period from 1990 until 1994, and then the de-escalation and negotiation period from 1994 until 1998, the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. So let's look at the context during the 1990s, the first period from 1990 until 1994 in Northern Ireland. We can see that the violence was as high as always. We are talking about 80 casualties per year. Most of them were civilians. So we can see things of continuation, maintenance of the same characteristics of the conflict, of the troubles, as well as things that started to take place, political developments that signaled change. So we can see on the one hand military deadlock that developed between the IRA and the British government, but at the same time we could see that there started secret negotiation between the British government and the IRA. We could see on the one hand that on the nationalist side there was a creation of pan-nationalist front uniting both the John Hume and Gerry Adams movements as well as the Irish government, while on the other side, on the Unionist side, we could see growing divisions between the two main parties in that among Unionists. We could see also a major political development in the form of the Downing Street Declaration, which once again the British and Irish governments went ahead and tried to pave a way towards negotiation between the two parties. But we can see once again failed negotiation between the constitutional parties that took place without the Republican movement. And while, on the other hand, we could see growing legitimacy for the Republican movement that we'll see along the way even became more important as Gerry Adams was invited to the US. So you can see here different political developments, both maintaining some characteristics of the conflict as well as the beginning of change in these characteristics. If we go on, that should say not context, but society. If we look at the challenges that society in Northern Ireland met during these times, we can see, first of all, that the similar insecurity in sense of both economic and military or security issues continue during these times. We could see growing feelings of a lack of control and stress among Protestants that sensed that they're losing their control over what's going on in the conflict, while the British government, which was supposed to support them, was leaving them once again. And there was growing uncertainty within Northern Ireland due to these failed negotiation rounds that I mentioned before, and the exclusion of the Republican movement while its legitimacy was growing at the same time. We could see also among society members in Northern Ireland, as well as, and Galia mentioned in her talk yesterday, the role of diaspora, also in the Irish diaspora in the US, which was extremely important in that case. We could see increasing opposition to the IRA use of force, which also influenced the movement. What can we see? So we touched those two factors of society and context. What can we see from these two leaders? David Trimble became a member of parliament for the UUP during these times. We could see in his speeches that I analyzed in my research that he was emphasizing at this time more and more the threats from the IRA. He was continuing to lead the struggle against the Republican movement using legal, security, and political tools. We could see very strong rigidity, both regarding the means to resolve the conflict. As you can see here, in this quote, he's saying the so-called peace process, I hope that appears in inverted commas, must also be even-handed. Many of us regard that process as being essentially bogus, for it involves making political concessions to terrorism. Okay, so he was both opposing means of talking to the other side or negotiation, as well as any change in the goals of the Unionist Party. From the other side, we could see Gerry Adams, which started to make a change in the means, especially that he was willing to use. So he definitely adhered to the goals of the conflict of the Republican movement, not leaving aside the idea of reuniting Ireland. But he was making change in the means in order to get there. And he was pushing from the bullet and ballot strategy more and more to focusing strictly on the political struggle. He was mentioning again and again in his speeches his support for a peace process and change, and he was also starting to differentiate between different segments among the other side. He was starting to view the other side not as a monolithic evil, but as something that has to be differentiated between the leadership, who may be rigid, and the public, who is actually part of us in Northern Ireland. Okay? You can see here what he said: the establishment and development of a peace process is a priority of the Sinn Féin. Personally, also for me, it is essential that a political strategy to bring about peace and justice in Ireland is developed. So if we sum up that period from these three-factor analyses, we can see on the one hand that there was growing motivation and to some extent also optimism for ending the conflict through real events that were taking place, political developments, third-party pressure, if you call Ireland and the UK third-party, not necessarily, of course, and social changes that were taking place. At the same time, we can see asymmetry between the two different political movements, the Unionist and the Nationalist, that also reflected through the speeches of the leaders. If the Nationalists were more inclining towards looking for political solution, we could see the Protestants very reluctant to lose their hegemony and leaving out their status. If we move on to the next period, during the negotiation period, we can see that maybe one of the most interesting characteristics of that period is that period being of dual nature. What do I mean by duality? So you can see, first of all, very strong situational duality, things working at the same time towards very opposing directions. On the one hand, we can see ceasefires, more than one, of course, and decrease in casualties, dramatic decrease in casualties. Okay, from 80 per year for a very small country, let's not forget, to less than 23 per year in average. We can see indirect first and then direct negotiation between the different parties that developed into an all-party negotiation process, inclusive negotiation, and a very constructive involvement by the UK, Ireland, the European community, and the US. But at the same time, we could see an opposing developments in a very different direction. And this is the case where we can see these things happening not only in Northern Ireland. We could see the same thing going on in Israel and Palestine during the Oslo process, these dual processes. That on the other hand, we can see the collapse of the ceasefire from time to time, confrontations and violence by spoilers who oppose the peace process. We could see in Northern Ireland, it took the form of also of intense disputes regarding decommissioning and what should come first, political agreement or decommissioning, with each side holding very strongly to its rationale why to do that or not to do that. And we could see during the peace talks, strengthening of the radical parties, okay? Both the Sinn Féin and the DUP, the more radical Unionist Party, grew stronger during the peace talks. Okay? If we look at the social challenges, we can see suspicion regarding the stability of the ceasefire and whether it will hold. There was also insecurity regarding the capabilities of the police in Northern Ireland, especially due to a parade that took place during that time by Protestants that the RUC tried to confront and was not able to handle it. Okay, and there was great fear whether, if any political developments will be able to withhold if security forces are not able to handle these situations. We could see from public opinion surveys at that time that there was disbelief in talks alongside optimism for future of the intergroup relations. Once again, this dual nature perceptions among the society members as well. We could see deepening social polarization within each one of the parties, okay? Splinter groups coming out from the IRA, the DUP leaving the talks, and even within the UUP, the movement of David Trimble, we could see the Orange Order members objecting vehemently the Good Friday Agreement. If we look at the leadership during this time, we can see a very gradual change taking place in the leadership of the Unionist side. We can see at first David Trimble in his speeches referring to strict adherence to the Unionist goals, only later willingness to change his means, okay, into the talks. He never used the word peace process, by the way. It was always the talks. Okay? And acknowledging the needs of the other side was the next step, and only just before the Good Friday Agreement and after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement was he willing to talk about change in substance and justifying that. I don't think I have time to refer to other examples, so I'll just, so I'll just keep on. We could see in his speeches, I could find very strong ambivalent feelings towards the other side. And once again, if we saw that in Gerry Adams' speeches already during the first period, we could see it here, the differentiation between different segments on the other side in his speeches only during the process of negotiation. And he was all along the way extremely suspicious regarding the talks, while holding on to the obligation that they have to keep inside the talks. Why? That's another big question about why he wanted to stay. I think one of the reasons was that he knew that if they will leave the table, the negotiation won't stop. They would just lose their ability to influence the output. If we look at Gerry Adams, we could see Gerry Adams framing his messages, once again, in order not to lose his audience and his supporters. He was framing that, and we can see that, once again, very much in very similar terms to what Yasser Arafat was doing with the Palestinians during the Oslo process. He was framing that as a part of the struggle, the continuation of the struggle, if you'd like, in other means, okay? And as a necessary stage to peace and justice. He was talking about the thank you, of risks. And past lunch is a difficult time. And differentiating between the past wrongs that the other side did and the partnership that has to be developed in the present in order to reach peacemaking. By the way, when I interviewed each one of these leaders, only Gerry Adams was willing to acknowledge the change that the nationalist and the Republican movement went through. Okay, David Trimble was denying any kind of change. He was saying that the context changed, that the other side changed. Gerry Adams was definitely willing to admit the change that the Republican movement went through. So, just to sum up, I'd like to suggest that that's, once again, in a humble way, and I think an important contribution to understand how opportunities for creating change in intractable conflicts what factors influence them, and to look at a case study, specific case study, in order to look at these different influential factors. And of course, I would be more than willing to continue addressing your questions during the Q&A. Thank you very much.